Good morning, all, and welcome to our electric pickup trucks ready for work. And thank you all so much for joining us today on the last day of September. Today, we are celebrating the National Drive Electric Week with our webinar partner, CleanTechnica. I am Cynthia Yusuf, a member relations manager here at Fourth, and I will be joined today by my co-moderator, Zach Shahan, the director of CleanTechnica. Zach, do you want to say a quick hi to everybody?
Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this and doing most of the work. We're happy to be a partner. Just happy to be a part of this transition in general, and I think it's a very exciting decade coming, especially in the electric truck world. CleanTechnica has been covering clean tech since 2007-8. I've been with the website since 2009 and the director since 2010. And we've just obsessively been covering clean tech as it's risen, and think this next decade is going to be super exciting.
Thank you so much. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. We will be getting through your Q&A at the end during our Q&A portion. We will also be sending out the webinar recording and the slides from our speakers shortly after the webinar. So if you miss anything, don't worry, we will be sending that information to you all. And just a brief introduction to who we are. Fourth, we are a nonprofit trade association. We are advocating for smart transportation through our work in four main focus areas, which are industry innovation, demonstration projects, policy advocacy, and consumer engagement. Through all of these and our over 170 member companies, we are working to advance smart and clean transportation. If you would like more information about Fourth, who we are, our membership, upcoming events, and just any white paper or case studies, you can find that on our website at fourthmobility.org. And just a quick announcement, the Fourth Roadmap Conference is the leading electric and smart mobility conference in the United States and gaining international recognition. The Roadmap sponsorship and registration is now currently open, and we just announced the launch of our call for proposals. So if you're working on any case studies, any research in the clean transportation industry, please feel free to submit a proposal. We will share some more information about our call for proposal in the webinar recap. Attendees today, you are going to be all entered into our sweepstake in celebration of National Drive Electric Week. Thanks to our member company, Blank Charging, we will be offering a home charger giveaway and a $100 public charging credit. So attendees, look forward to that. Next week, we'll be announcing our winners. Electric truck.
All right. Sorry. So we're ready for our panel, I believe, and we have a really fantastic panel, some great experts, movers and shakers. First up here, Chelsea Sexton. I think probably everyone listening or watching knows Chelsea, but as a quick intro, she's been an EV advocate working to accelerate electric transportation since the 1990s. I like that I'm normally, have a bit more history than other people, but she's got way more than me, so it's humbling to be here with her. She started with General Motors EV1 program, which I hope everyone's familiar with. It was another generation. Her diverse adventures since have included co-founding Plug-in America, guiding Vantage Point Capital Partners' early investment in Tesla Motors, of course now known as Tesla, and directing an Automotive X Prize to encourage the development of compelling, highly efficient vehicles. Chelsea, thank you for being with us today. We have also Lee Malloy, sorry for the mispronunciation. She leads research and development for Cox Automotive Mobility, with an emphasis on emerging technology and mobility services. such as electric vehicle battery, powertrain and charging, as well as sensor and calibration, ADAS capabilities for fleet and retail clients. She's also been in the space for several years, and I'm sure has a wealth of experience to share with us. So big welcome to those first two speakers, panelists. Really happy for you to be here.
Yes, and following up Lee and Chelsea, we have Terry O'Day. Terry O'Day is a co-founder at In Charge Energy in 2019. It is the leader in charging infrastructure for trucks and bus fleets in the United States. And finally, we'll hear from Cynthia. Cynthia Maves is the regional sales manager at Lordstown Motors Corporation. Cynthia has been an EV advocate and leader for 10 years. She serves on the board of Clean Fuels Ohio and Chicago area Clean Cities. And we have just a fantastic panelist coming your way.
So I've just got two slides to sort of kick us off to get us into the conversation a little bit. I think it's clear, but let's just highlight that the electric truck revolution is enabled by the EV battery revolution, the lithium-ion battery revolution. We wouldn't really have the capability of competitive electric trucks if it wasn't for battery costs dropping a great deal. So we have a chart here. Bloomberg New Energy Finance data chart we created. Dr. Maximilian Holland created was the drop in battery prices from 2013 to 2019. This is split between cell and pack. You can see 2019, the pack cost is $156 per kilowatt hour. It's so much cheaper than 2013's pricing or 2014's that really, if you're thinking about this market a few years ago, you're way out of date. You have to think about what's capable, what's happening now, what's capable now, and also what's going to be capable, what's going to be possible in the next couple of years. So this long-standing trend in EV drops is continuing and enables the highly competitive electric trucks we'll talk about today. So just as kind of a way to try to see that, I think sort of understand that better. We've seen Tesla has dropped the pricing of its vehicles, whereas you start off with the high-priced Tesla Model S, and now it has the more affordable Tesla Model 3 that sells in much higher volumes. On the flip side, you have the Nissan Leaf situation, which is interesting to look at. You had the 2011 Leaf had 73 miles of range, and the 2020 Leaf, which comes around the same price, has 3 times more range, 226 miles range. So you can see that as the battery prices have dropped, you've either been able to drop the cost of vehicles, like in Tesla's case, or raise the range of vehicles to make them much more competitive, compelling, and acceptable for mainstream buyers. So of course, all of this, I'm showing sort of a car example, but all of this enables the finally really cost competitive, range acceptable electric pickup trucks that we're going to talk about today. So let's jump from that into Chelsea's presentation, where I'm sure she'll have a lot more interesting details to share.
Thank you. I'm not sure about interesting, but you can tell from the picture that my vehicle testing parameters tend to err on the more personal side. It is a pleasure to be here, and as was mentioned, I've been doing this for quite some time, and ironically, there were actually more electric trucks and SUVs in the 1990s generation of EVs, even though everyone knows with the little EV1, we actually had more trucks and other things, and so it feels a little bit full circle to come back to this conversation now, but in days that are fighting. I don't represent anybody in particular, so I get the pleasure of doing a bit more of setting the landscape of what it is we're talking about. Certainly, we all sort of think about, regular classic pickup trucks, farm trucks, stuff like that, and those are certainly quite a few of what are coming from both incumbent automakers like General Motors and Ford, but also from newer folks like Rivian. But also SUVs are in this category, and ironically, Stellantis, which used to be Fiat Chrysler, they're sticking pretty much with plug-in hybrids, which is an interesting, outstanding question, especially in this particular use case. And there's a subgroup of us advocates that actually encourage this flexibility in many of the policies, not to force a certain thing to be made, but certainly to allow for the fact that really well electrified plug-in hybrids that do the vast majority of their miles in electric mode could actually be really useful for this particular market, especially in more rural areas or in smaller fleets, more disadvantaged communities, things like that with lower infrastructure burdens. Of course, we're also including goods movement, and that's becoming increasingly popular in these times, but already had quite a bit of traction before. And so really, when we talk about light duty trucks, it's kind of class 1 through 3. And that's, class 1 is under 6,000 pounds, so mostly cars, occasionally some of the smaller SUVs. Class 2 is 6,000 to 10,000 pounds, which is the bulk of what we're talking about. On the lighter side are things like Ford Rangers through sort of F-150 and some of the 250 class trucks. And then class 3 is 10,000 to 14,000 pounds. And so that's the 350 range, and everything you see with the 3,500 after it, it's sort of that size we're talking about, but also the SUV and van similarities between them. And why this is such a big opportunity in the electrification space is because of the 17 million vehicles sold last year in 2019. Over 12 million of them were this light duty truck class. And that's kind of been underserved for the most part within EVs, has for many years been by far the thing we've been asked for the most. And so at both a retail and a fleet level, we're really looking forward to this increased variety of vehicles coming in the next few years. We can't overlook that, much like the EV cars we often talk about, this is very policy driven. From a federal perspective, CAFE has different requirements for light trucks than cars, and we'll see how that shakes out in the ongoing fight that is likely to end up in court potentially. But for now, light-duty trucks have to reach about 30 miles per gallon in the year 2020, up to increasingly to nearly 40 miles per gallon by 2025. So there's a fairly steep ramp coming in the next 5 years in a variety of policies. Of course, there's a mandate for California, which a dozen or so other states follow increasingly by the day. It's a little hard to keep up. And that addresses class 1, but also class 2A. Above that, there's actually also now an advanced clean truck regulation that addresses class 2B through 8. And there's some murkiness of vehicles that can actually comply in either one. So these two foundational CARB programs really also address this class of vehicles that we're talking about. And a moment on the governor's executive order last week, it was an interesting headline, but at the end of the day, what it actually means is that CARB in particular will be tasked with sort of figuring out how to do that. And it will likely be composed primarily of these programs and a few others that address individual use cases. And those processes are already playing out, and we're already trending in this direction. So the ZEV mandate is currently about 9.5% of vehicle sales is the credit target for 2020. It goes up to 22% by 2025. And then Advanced Clean Trucks has a slightly different path towards carbon neutrality by 2045, but it picks out different individual vehicles and use cases and has them aiming for targets that are sooner. So municipal vehicles and utility vehicles are sooner. They're not really in this class, but drayage trucks, refuse trucks, those sorts of things have to comply sooner. So it's addressed more on the type of vehicle and the use case versus a particular weight. So that's also been very supportive and helps drive this particular market. And then lastly, for now, Terry, I know will talk quite a bit about this, someone else who's been at this as long as I have, but certainly there are a bunch of other landscape questions that come with this interest in trucks, one of which is the infrastructure needs, but also some less obvious questions around pairing use cases together. Some of these vehicles and some of these fleets and use cases shouldn't be trying to mix it up in a Whole Foods parking lot with regular drivers. And so creating some dedicated charging, sometimes different layouts of charging so they can be pull-through style, different questions like that are arising as well, even in the light-duty space, well before we start thinking about long-haul trucking and stuff like that. So there's lots of exciting things coming and plenty to discuss. So I will let the next person go and jump to Q&A, which is always the most fun part.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And now we'll hear from Lee Malloy from Cox Automotive.
Fantastic. And Chelsea, thank you. Great update. And we'll share many similar sentiments. As I get started, in the work I do at Cox Automotive, just want to talk big picture about EV adoption and body style. And Chelsea really hit on a lot of the themes. But, on the adoption front, we've seen EVs really accelerate through COVID and underscoring sort of our bullish expectations of the electric powertrain at Cox. Last week, I issued a white paper titled COVID-19 Recovery, Speed Bump or Accelerant for the EV Market. And in it, we highlighted what we're experiencing as a short-term dip with EV adoption this year, largely driven by COVID. But what we see is a long-term positive trajectory for adoption of the electric powertrain. So the auto industry is really resilient overall, and especially so as it relates to the electric vehicle. So big picture too, this rise in the EV is really framed in part by more investment, evolving consumer perceptions through positive experiences around EVs, and we're getting closer to that cost parity, which we started out the discussion with. The other thing from a contextual standpoint that's important around the electric vehicle is body style, right? And that's kind of the crux of the conversation today. Overall, the vehicle market on the new side has seen a big shift away from cars to light trucks. About 10 years ago, the car share of the new vehicle market was about 50%. Today, the car share is only about 25%. So within that light truck segment, the SUV really dominates, but pickups are the next largest segment, and they account for about 20% of the new vehicle market. So then we look, the slides are going. So then we look at the BEV market and body style specifically, and we still know that the cars dominate there today, except for, or because of the launch of the Tesla Model 3. And we're seeing some uptick in SUV sales, but pickups today have no share in the BEV space, and we believe that's about to change. And of course, that will change with the introduction of the pickup choices you see here. So OEMs and investors are really betting big on the electric pickup truck, but to have a balanced conversation, concerns still persist for those that are less bullish around things like range, the ability to maintain range while hauling, the availability of charging stations, and not to mention some point to some on the electric pickup side. So with that stage setting, what we do know, and Chelsea hit on this as well, is that it costs less to operate an EV. Our own Kelley Blue Book research has found that the 5-year total cost of operation is about 58% lower in the EV than the ICE, and that's made up in part of 60% savings on fuel and 25% savings in maintenance. So there's significant upside for both the consumer and fleets to go electric. And fleet vehicles, I believe, will electrify at a faster rate than the consumer car park, as they are called on in sort of our after COVID environment to help with a couple things in particular, and that is the movement of goods around. So we've seen this rise in e-commerce, food and grocery delivery that's going to be increasingly powered by fleets, and the electric powertrain is really well suited to lead here. So the belief is that within this Class 1 and Class 2 vehicles we talked about earlier, we're going to see as much as a 70% increase in today's base of 10 million fleet vehicles to nearly 17 million by 2030. And with that increase in fleet vehicles brings this increase in vehicle miles traveled. So what we also are seeing is that while not all of this fleet increase is going to be driven through electric vehicle adoption, we are seeing an uptick in electric vehicles within some common fleets, like UPS's partnership with Arrival. We know they're having discussions with players like Workhorse. Amazon is obviously hooked up with Rivian, FedEx with Change. So lastly, with all these miles at play, the last thing I want to point out is taking care of EVs can be really different. On the left side of this slide, you see that, sure, some of the caretaking is the same when you compare an electric vehicle to an internal combustion vehicle. They all require cleaning and detailing and traditional maintenance around things like tires and brakes. And for fleet-owned vehicles, there's also traditional support around infleeting, defleeting, rebalancing. But again, much of it looks the same for ICE as it does electric. But where things get interesting is around EV battery support, which is the right side of the screen. And while most EV batteries are expected to last well beyond their warranty period, service events will crop up. And for consumers, though, battery servicing is expected to be fairly infrequent, and we're seeing many OEMs extending warranties, kind of showing their high degree of confidence in battery life expectancy. But in the high utilization EV fleet model where vehicles rack up lots of miles and require more daily or weekly charge cycles, batteries can have wear and tear accumulate. So at Cox, we believe battery health is really key to optimizing battery life in fleets. And when battery health is poor, a fleet manager must work with the OEMs and service partners to decide how to best take care of that asset and introduce activities like repair, remanufacturing, and refurbishment. And all are good options to reduce the carbon impact and limit the need for new cell production. But if the battery pack is at end of life, then repurposing into energy storage or recycling options are also needed. And at Cox, through our Pivot and Mannheim networks, we're introducing battery health to assess the condition and value of both personal and fleet vehicles to support both valuation and service decisioning. We want to help optimize that first life of the EV battery and support its end-of-life treatment. And one area I touch on in the EV white paper is about managing some of the unintended consequences of spent EV batteries. We know they're coming, and at Cox, we want to support their proper end-of-life treatment so we can leave the Earth in a better place than we found it.
Thank you.
And that's all I have.
And thank you so much. White paper, and we sure be sending that a recap for all of the attendees. A good read over the weekend. We'll be sharing that. And now we'll hear about infrastructure. Our next speaker will be Terry O'Day, in charge.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to Fourth and CleanTechnica for bringing us together today. I changed my background in homage to Chelsea. That's a second ad campaign for the General Motors EV1, and my background goes way back then as well. Starting out with Edison International and then moving into deploying the first rental car fleet in the country that rented only electric cars. And at that time, we had a mix of Ford Ranger EVs. So it's really exciting to see the pickup trucks coming back into the market and the kind of volume that we're talking about in this market. What you'll hear from me today, you had great truck info from our first two speakers. I'm going to focus on infrastructure. One of the things you'll notice is that our company focuses on fleet. To date, much of the EV market has been focused on retail sales and consumers. And so many of the infrastructure solutions have been optimized towards retail, towards public charging, towards home charging. Not a lot of innovation yet on fleet, and that's where our company is principally focused. We are an energy and EV charging as a service company, and we're covering a full value chain designed to provide a turnkey service to fleets. So we come in at the fleet and facilities planning stage. We provide we'll provide a design and engineering plan for the facilities and for the fleets. We'll manage construction. We'll specify equipment, and that includes hardware and software. We'll also stay behind and service and maintain the stations and the fleet, and we provide all of that in a financing solution. So, it is the full end-to-end system solution, and our team is some of the most experienced in the industry. Myself, as an old-timer, joined up with a couple of other old-timers to do this work, including folks who were on the first deployment of superchargers for Tesla. Greg Coleman, who's on our board of directors, comes from our investment partner, Macquarie Capital. And Macquarie Capital is there to help us produce finance solutions so that we know, because we know that the initial purchase price of EVs is higher, but the total operating cost is lower. So we want to rebalance that and fit it into the budget that our operating partner for the fleet has available. We also took in an investment from ABB when we closed our Series A in January. ABB is the hardware leader in DC charging in particular in the US and globally, and we are not committed to just ABB. We will pick the solution that fits right for the fleet. And our first big partner is Ryder Truck. So any of Ryder Truck's 65,000 customers across the US that is interested in an electric truck, we come out and do the infrastructure for them. And so the problem in EV infrastructure for fleets is that introducing a lot of electric vehicles into your fleets will increase your demand. It can put you into a category where you need utility service upgrades. Once you have to get the utility service on site, you're talking about a 12-month schedule at least, just for that side of the work. And when you do that, you face significant other challenges, not the least of which you've just handed off the critical path that to an outside party that is a utility. And as we know, utilities are great partners for this, but their top priority is reliability on the grid. So you'll find that a wildfire comes up in California and your 12 months just turned into 18 to 24 months. So for fleet managers, we have to figure out how to solve that problem. Additionally, as you deploy, you have to plan for growth. And the deployment of EV charging infrastructure follows something of a step function in that the first 10 vehicles might cost you X, and you can probably provide for another 5 vehicles on X, but once you get to the 6th vehicle, you jump to Y. And that structure continues over the life of that infrastructure. So you have to figure out how to plan for the long run for your facilities. And the real challenge here for a lot of fleets is that many companies have a fleet manager and have a facilities manager. And up until we started working with electric vehicles, those two rarely ever had to talk to each other. So a lot of our partners are finding that there's a lot of internal process that they have to go through in order to develop the right infrastructure solution that meets the needs of the facility and the fleet manager. And so what we do is we'll come in and we'll start in the first instance by following this 4-square model. We look for energy conservation measures on the property so that we can first reduce the load before, and that can eliminate the need in a pilot deployment for utility service upgrade. Once we identify how much power is available through those measures, then we'll talk about producing energy on site through the utility service upgrade, utilizing storage, and what types of charger technologies make sense for the fleet you're deploying. When you do that, you can talk about power sharing, you can talk about other strategies, and you want to optimize it to the use case of the fleet. So this is a substantial amount of customized work for a single fleet. We, as I said, stay behind and operate the stations, and then as we stay behind and operate, we tweak and optimize, and that means getting the most out of the system that we provide together. It has to be scalable. It has to be serviced. You know, one of the sayings in my old company was, there's a lot of grants out there, but a free charger is like a free dog. It takes a lot of care and maintenance. So you have to have a system that is serviceable and scalable, and we're committed to helping fleets figure that out. And I'll move on to the next speaker and to the Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Terry. And finally, we'll hear from Cynthia Maves at Lordstown Motors. Cynthia?
Hello. Thank you for having me, Forth and CleanTechnica, and appreciate you hosting us. Also, it was great to hear from the other panelists. Great talks there. Okay. Wanted to tell you a little bit about the Lordstown Motors story. Here is an overhead view of the Lordstown plant and the surrounding area. You may recall that this plant used to be owned by GM. GM produced about 400,000 Chevy Cruzes at this plant. And when GM closed the plant, it was devastating to the Mahoning Valley area. A lot of workers were laid off, and a lot of other damaging economic effects happened in that area. So back in November, we purchased the plant from GM for about $20 million, and we are in the process of retooling it to build the Endurance, and really excited to get going in that plant. We have renamed the valley Voltage Valley. You probably know that Ohio is typically known as part of the Rust Belt, but in this valley, we are going to focus on electric vehicle production and also promoting the electric vehicles vendors to assist with electric vehicle production. A little bit about our leadership team. Steve Burns is our CEO. He founded Workhorse and is also the founder of Lordstown Motors. Lordstown Motors has licensed some of our technology from Workhorse, and Workhorse is a 10% owner of Lordstown Motors. So the plant is very large. It's got about 6.2 million square feet. That makes it one of the largest OEM facilities in the United States. As I mentioned we are retooling the plant right now. It will probably cost about $120 million to design it to produce the Endurance, also to make the battery packs and to make our hub motors. And if we had to build this plant from the ground up, it would likely cost about $3 billion. So this is a picture of the all-electric Endurance. I did want to mention why we call it the Endurance. The Endurance is named after the people of Lordstown, Ohio, where our plant is located, because they have been through a lot with the closing of the GM plant and have endured through it. And so this is a nod to the people of Lordstown. The truck is designed and built for fleets. So we did extensive research on what fleets need in terms of a work truck, and this is the truck that is designed just for them. What differentiates it is the total cost of ownership savings that we are expected to save over the lifetime of the vehicle. So for instance, if a fleet drives about 20,000 miles a year and they own the vehicle for about 5 years, then we expect them to save about $21,000 over a similar ICE pickup. The range is 250 miles, and again, that was designed for fleets. We got feedback from fleets, and that was the range that they felt like covered most of their needs and also allowed us to keep the vehicle at a good price point. We are expecting fleets to save about 75% in annual maintenance cost compared with a competing gas truck. So we are about to go into production on our beta trucks, and that will happen this November. Those will be tested and certified, and then we will go into full production of the vehicle in Q1 or Q2 next year, with estimated delivery happening in Q3 and Q4 next year. The price point of the truck is $52,500, and that is before the $7,500 federal tax credit. I did want to highlight that the battery is warranted for 8 years, 100,000 miles, but we do expect it to last longer than that. We are seeing 600 horsepower, 0 to 60 in about 5.5 seconds. So it is designed to meet all of the power needs of fleets. Here's a look at the chassis. You can see that it's a very simple design. The hub motors are in the wheels of the chassis, and it gives true four-wheel drive. So between the weight of the battery that is right in the chassis and the weight of the hub motors, which they weigh about 80 pounds each, that really gives that true four-wheel drive right out of the gate. So here's a little bit of an expanded view of our hub motor. The hub motor is very efficient, so all the energy output goes directly into the wheels for immediate movement. It also allows for the front space of the front trunk, where usually the engine is, to be free, and fleets can use that for storage for tools and their equipment. It also allows the truck to be very safe because there's a large crumple zone with that front trunk space. Also wanted to mention, if you go on our website and go to the technology page, you can see video provided by the designer of the hub motors. They really put the motors through their paces. They've done a 25-year simulated endurance test, and they put the hub motors through snow, ice, mud, and also through salt, and it performed excellently. I did want to mention that, again, it's been designed for fleets. We've got 7,500 pounds in towing capacity. We have a power outlet that is in the bed of the truck that can charge and run your power tools, your 240 volt power tools. We are expecting to see another power outlet in the front trunk space. Also, there are state-of-the-art fleet telematics built into the vehicle at the factory as an option. This is very important to fleet managers. They'll be able to manage their fleet appropriately, always know the state of charge of their vehicles, whether they have been plugged in appropriately at the right time, and be able to manage many other things that they need with their fleet. Also, the truck is compatible with most OEM and third-party upfitting options, such as service bodies, toolboxes, and other equipment. We are working with some upfitters right now to design the truck just so it can provide a lot of different upfitting options from the outset. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And now we'll get into our Q&A portion. And if all of our presenters and co-moderator can please turn on your webcam so we can get through as many of these questions as we can in the next 20 minutes.
So the first question here we have for the panelists. Electric pickup trucks have been available in China for over a year now. What's taking so long to bring them to the US market? Maybe we could go in order. Yeah, well, Yeah, we can. Chelsea, I don't know if the order's the same. So Chelsea, and then anyone else, if you want to chime in, put your hand up as well.
I think Q&A, everyone just jumps in. A little chaos is not a horrible thing. I think it's important to note in general that China is a bit of a specialized market. And while many automakers are pairing with Chinese companies and starting to concentrate on producing for China, there just is not that much cross-pollination between China and anywhere else of any vehicles. There's a few Buicks that are made and exported, and most people don't realize it. But for the most part, all things China are focused on the domestic market, and there has not been that much emphasis or interest yet on homologating anything for America and Europe and other areas. So that's certainly part of it. With respect to why aren't car companies being more responsive to the U.S. market in general, I think that's a good question to ask them. But I think many of them have been kind of clear that, yeah, they're all preparing to go electric for all markets, but for the most part, the industry remains a little bit ambivalent about it. And certainly when it comes to trucks and vehicles that they deem lower profit to transition. So they're planning to do it, but most of them are planning to do it in a relatively slow cadence until they're compelled to by either market demand or regulation.
Yeah, agree with that. And, and just building off Chelsea's comment that the Chinese market is very different, when you look at the regulatory environment in the US, we just haven't had the tailwind, so to speak, to advance the introduction of electric, especially in body styles, really beyond those compliance vehicles. But that's all starting to change, but it takes time. In addition to, the thresholds by which, our domestic vehicles are evaluated for safety and durability also look different and make our market unique.
We can jump to the next question. This question is in regards to servicing and maintaining the electric trucks, and I think we can open this up for you to start, Terry, and we can do a roundtable after that. When it comes to independent service shops not being qualified or trained to work on electric trucks, where else can people go to service their electric trucks other than dealerships? What education should be going on now so the workforce is ready for electric trucks and electric truck servicing?
Great question. Yeah, the structure is just not cut out for this task. The important note, of course, is that you have a much lower service requirement than conventional vehicles, and that's one of the major contributors to the total cost of ownership for EVs beating internal combustion engines. But the promise of that total cost of ownership is only achieved when you get the infrastructure right and when you get the service model right. And so this is a question of workforce training for sure. Today, fleets that operate across the spectrum of vehicles, many of them are teaming up with Ryder Truck, for example. Ryder is creating a specialization in servicing electric vehicles that is helping a lot of companies make that first transition. So, if you want to partner with a company like that, you can have a service partner that you can rely on. Additionally, a number of states are investing in workforce development programs for service. So, community colleges, union-based programs with the IBEW and NECA all have examples of good service programs that you can leverage as a fleet, and if you're a state, that you could model based on what other states have done in order to prepare your fleet.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I'll jump in. I think, the repair and service profile for the battery electric is unique, and I touched on some of that when it comes to battery support work. other parts are similar to what's been done today. What makes the battery electric vehicle unique is that the warranties are longer for the electric powertrain. In most cases, 8 years, 100,000 miles or more. So given the relative newness of the battery electric car park in the US, most of those vehicles still remain under warranty, although we're starting to see, Leafs and others age out. And I think that it gets back to, from an independent service and repair standpoint, similar to the right to repair discussions that are out there, access and partnerships on, diagnostic data and proper servicing that can be provided to the consumer, so the consumer has the options about how to take best care of that vehicle, both in and out of warranty.
Okay, we'll jump to number 3. Number 3 is directed at Terry. There are 2 approaches to fleet charging overnight: all units connected to level 2 chargers, or shuttling the fleet past a small number of level 3 fast DC chargers. Can you talk about the trade-offs between these 2 approaches?
Yeah, we are finding that a number of fleets that thought they were going to go in with level 2 are actually choosing to go to DC fast charging. And it's really a question of what's right for your fleet. What's your use case? Does your vehicle sit there for a long time? Do you have an operator to shuttle the vehicle across chargers? Those kinds of questions are specific to your fleet. But specific to the difference between level 2 and DC is, of course, the rate of power. And the rate of power for DC being higher gives you more flexibility for different solutions. And if you can create an on-site solution that limits the number of changes between the chargers, then you can take advantage of those solutions. So what I mean in specific is if you can power share across an array of DC fast chargers, you can turn on all of those chargers all at once or at a different, or you can stage them over time, and that will allow you to, in some cases, take advantages of time of use metering from the utilities in a different way. So, for example, if you have 10 vehicles all on level 2, and they as a result are going to charge for 10 hours, you don't have flexibility to get outside of that 10 hours very much. But if, for example, you have them connected on DC charging, you can cycle them through to take advantage of different tariffs that might be available to you. You can also take advantage of things like demand response because you have the ability to turn them on, turn them off during the day, and choose when you want to charge. So we're finding more and more fleets are moving towards DC charging. The other element is OEMs. The manufacturers are looking more closely at providing DC charging solutions and taking the AC charger on board because it adds weight and cost to the vehicle. So if you're a fleet solution that's optimized to delivering on cost and on value, then the additional AC charger may not be necessary for it.
Okay, we'll move on to the other question. So what are your thoughts on charging? I know we've discussed the electric truck is coming. How about charging infrastructure for the electric trucks? What are our thoughts on charging the fleets? How best can we start thinking about? What should we start thinking about, or is it something where we have to consider a back swapping scenario? Cynthia, do you want to go first? We're taking this one so we can hear.
Sure. Part of that question I didn't hear due to the connection, but in terms of fleet charging, I think with fleets, you sometimes get difficulties. As Terry mentioned before, you've got fleet managers that have never worked with their facility managers before. So this is a new world for them where they're having to do that. And then they're often having to decide, which budget the infrastructure comes out of. Does it come out of the vehicle budget or does it come out of a facilities budget? So there is, fleets have to face that situation. I've also seen situations where fleets, especially in big cities, a lot of times they keep their vehicles in garages or parking lots that they do not own, where they lease space. So then they're having to work with the owner of the space to install that charging. So we plan to work with fleets and give them, to some extent, give them some advice based on their scenario and connecting them with resources where they can get objective advice on charging, what makes sense for them. Do they have demand charges? Do they run their vehicles 24/7 or do they park at night? And level 2 is great for that. One thing about the savings on the maintenance is they're also saving with downtime on the vehicle. So when they're not having to maintain it every 3, 4, 5 months, it's staying in service and they're not having to, experience that downtime. So that also comes into play with figuring out your charging scenario and what works best.
Lee, do you have any comments to the charging question?
I'm sorry, I lost connectivity for a bit. Could you repeat the question?
The question is in regards to charging the electric trucks. What do we want to consider when we're charging, or should we be considering a battery swapping scenario on this, or how do we consider charging and charging infrastructure when it comes to electric pickup trucks?
Gotcha. So it's complicated would be the answer I would provide. A lot of it has to do with how much capacity that battery pack has and energy it's storing. If the duty cycle for that electric pickup truck requires that vehicle to travel a range of 100 miles, say, a day, then I think that's easily achievable in a moderately sized pack today, and that sort of negates the need to swap out the pack, right? And it's also better for the environment. I do foresee in the fleet model, as more electric trucks and delivery vans convert over, there will be an impact on the grid, right? And as, say, 100 electric delivery vans with battery packs of 150 kilowatt hours each all pull up to charge at the end of the day, that energy in terms of line and load needs to be solved for somehow. Some will be through storage. But I think, there's some innovation needed to accommodate the grid. But in general, it's a solvable scenario.
Mary, do you want to give us some input in regards to your thoughts on this question?
Sure. I think one of the things when you're thinking about deploying electric trucks is where you want to charge. Will you be using a single charging hub? Do you have multiple facilities where the vehicle will be charging? And do you have a need to be charging in the wild, right? Those questions will determine the size of your infrastructure, the type of your charging solution, and my door, and just how to, and is also importantly, your fleet payment systems that you'll deploy. So, if you're using a public charging network, for example, as part of your solution, you need to figure out how to integrate that with your existing fuel management solution and how you service.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready for question number 5, right? Or did Chelsea, were you going to also respond to that?
You insist. No, we're not going to do swapping. But I think, I mean, so many good things were said with this question. It became our biggest one. But what it all comes down to is there, just like multi-unit dwelling charging, there is no single solution for this. So there is a place for level 2. There's a place for 50 kilowatt DC as well as the faster speeds. And there is not just one that we should tell everyone to do. And, you know, sort of facility charging is not mutually exclusive from public charging. We're also already starting to see the public networks start to cater specifically to installations for transportation network companies, for example. We may see similar fleet-oriented solutions, and utilities are a category we've not even begun to talk about, but they are particularly enthusiastic about potentially helping to provide some of this charging in ways that work best for fleets versus more retail drivers. And then I will also add again that to the extent that automakers are willing to go back there, and some of this will go down to the credit systems, plug-in hybrids also have a role here. In part because they lessen the infrastructure requirements and they allow more rural communities and folks that often tend to get overlooked by all of these conversations to have additional options on top of all the varieties of charging for BEVs.
Yeah, and I just wanted to emphasize that one for one moment myself as well. There's never an answer that fits everyone. I think there's really a need to understand who you are servicing and what they want and need. Some people want super fast charging. I'd rather have 50 kilowatt charging myself for my purposes. I know other people want 300 kilowatt charging. Other people just charge overnight, and it matters a lot. The fleet use. I managed a shuttle service, electric shuttle service in Europe, and it really depends on specific applications of the day, of the week. You sort of need a mixture in a lot of cases. So I think it's really important to try to understand your customer base and what they need. So should I go to question 5 or final question? I'm not sure who.
We are at 10:59. We'll do one last question, and
Okay.
we know we have a lot of questions we didn't get to, so we'll be sending some follow-up.
Yeah. Okay. So we're jumping to final question, which was, what has held back the electric truck market more, policy or consumer demand or something else? And I guess we'll start with Chelsea, and then I'll put it in the chat here who can follow.
I'm always enthusiastic about the various questions. Lack of trucks. Lack of product is what has held back the electric truck market. But since uniquely in the automotive industry, automakers require demand to predate and continually exceed supply, it does end up going down to both of the other things, and somewhat weighted more towards policy, because consumer demand, in whatever form consumer comes, tends to be dismissed as anecdotal. So we've had various efforts in the past that have tried to rally that consumer demand to be more visible, and those things are useful. Certainly pressing policy is useful. We have to get beyond California and just the CARB states. So it's great that more states are becoming CARB states, but we also have a huge market outside of those areas that tend to get short shrift. So yes, pressing on, lack of trucks. And yes, I know there's some startups coming, but we need everybody.
I can join in. It's important that when we're talking about trucks, we're talking about total cost of ownership. And in the US, we have a difference in our markets versus even Canada, especially Europe. And that is that our diesel and gas prices are low and our demand charges for electricity are high. So while I agree 100% with what Chelsea said, we do need reforms to make this market move faster, and the reforms need to be focused on providing demand charge relief for fleets. You've seen a number of jurisdictions take this on. California's utilities have a number of in the South have taken this up. But the reality is there are more than 3,000 utilities across the United States. And for each fleet, each utility relationship, this needs to get solved because what we're fighting here is petroleum, and we have to figure out how to fit our solution into that window below the price of diesel or gasoline.
I would close by saying, you know, with respect to electric pickups, it's a dynamic segment, right? When you think about the consumer that purchases a pickup truck, some are weekend warriors, some are, you know, the adventurers, some are, you know, more suburban or rural dwellers, and some pickup trucks are, you know, called on to be the workhorse, literally, as part of that person's job or their personally owned business. So given that spectrum of interest, I think, you know, there's a pretty tall bill for, you know, one electric pickup truck to fit the bill, but the choices are going to be continued to be introduced to the market, and I think both consumers and fleets are going to find options that are appealing, in large part supported by that lower total cost of ownership.
I just wanted to make a comment. You know, I agree with Terry about the cost of gas and diesel being so low in the United States versus other parts of the world. Europe sees more EV adoption because their gas prices are much higher than here. We also need to work on infrastructure, especially in states that are not California. And policy makes a big difference. Incentives. A lot of folks, consumers and fleet managers, both look at not always total cost of ownership, but they're looking at the sticker price of the vehicle, and it needs to come down. And we are getting to a place where, you know, because the battery prices have dropped, the cost of the vehicles has gone down. So lower sticker prices helps for sure, but also policy, incentives, and education too.
Thank you so much, everyone. As you can see, we have our presenters' information here. Like I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out the webinar recap and the recording for any follow-ups. I know we did not get through to even half of the questions coming in, and we have more coming in right now. So I wish we could do this all day, but we have to let our panelists go. So thank you all again for joining us, and we want to say thank you to our webinar partner at CleanTechnica, and as well for the great offer today of a charger and the $100 charging credit. And our next webinar will be coming up on October 13th. We'll be discussing advances in heavy-duty charging. We'll be joined by Ford's Program Manager Aaron Gallagher with ABB, Caliber, and Care of Automotive to discuss some of the advancements and applications of heavy-duty charging, both here in the United States and in Europe. So we hope you're able to join us on October 13th for that conversation. And we know charging infrastructure is a big topic, and we can't have as many webinars to cover them as possible. So we hope this will be engaging for you all. Thank you all so much. And for myself and from Ford, we want to thank our panelists again. Thank you.
I'll close with keep calm and charge on.